Gonna go ahead and start the stream. Going to go ahead and start the stream. All right. Letting YouTube catch up here just a second. Chris Courtney here, New Pragmatic. Thanks a lot for joining me on this snowy Monday morning here in Chicago. It's time for the feedback loop, and we're starting a little bit later this morning. We had an issue to deal with, but it's always nice to get this underway, and we have some student work to review, and we have a couple of questions in the queue that came in just before, or actually just after we normally start, so it's actually beneficial that we're starting a tad later this morning. Want to go ahead and share my screen because it's important to get right to the student work that's been submitted. And it's weird, I've got like a double arrow. The first thing I want to look at here is Rebecca has submitted her Silly Candy case study. And there's one thing I love about it is it has she's going through right now, and as you can see, she's submitting multiple case studies, and this is really because she has what would be an extremely long case study if she talked about each of the products that this one company that she created, if she talked about each of the products in the case study. But instead, I've talked to her about breaking out that into some sort of clickable format so that she would have an opportunity to then link to, say, this gummy worm mold here. And she could go over here and have gummy worm molds. And then she could talk about it in length, show all the images, rather than trying to get all those blurbs into this. So from that perspective, I think the structure of this is really strong. I think that sort of very high level, we have one case study that leads to multiple small case studies. I think that's a good idea. One of the issues that I have with it, and it's something that was just brought up in Daily Stand Up, was the grid. And coming out of the box, setting up your structure for the grid, it's obviously you can solve a lot of problems really early on, or you can you can inject issues into this in the wireframing stage. So you're not quite at the wireframing stage. You've moved a little bit beyond that. You've got color and images and whatnot. But one of the problems that I see right now is the fact that this is a really wide measure. Typically speaking, I don't necessarily go over 700 pixels in width for a area of what I would call body copy. And what I mean by that is any copy that is intended to be read at the same size for a long passage. I think if you went wider, with something like this, that's fine. But anytime you get down into the smaller sizes, I think that 700 is pretty much where you want to be, and that pulls you kind of in this range, like here or here. That's 637. That's 750, and now you're getting into 850, 860. This might be acceptable, particularly because it gives you an even measure, because you could just move it over and you could have the same to each side. I do understand that sometimes you might not want to go all cutesy, everything is all even, and I think that's fine. Here you've got a really nice left edge started. I could see continuing that. I would consider pulling things into here and adjusting these as you go down. I don't think there's anything wrong with having sections like this go all the way across, so you could bounce out and go across. So let's take this value prop section. if this was at 600, it would be like that. And then you've got some stuff in here. I would have this on the grid right now, and I think this is just like you've kind of thrown it on here pretty fast. But I would definitely have this on the grid. That looks like what you intended to do. But I would allow this bit of information to come inside, and then I would probably put like any smaller images. I would put any smaller images like over here to help even that out. I've also had I've had designs where I would carry images in and then just kind of wrap around. That's something else that you could consider doing. But by and large, you know, when I would do things like that, it would tend to be like let's just take this section here, and I'm moving all sorts of stuff around, but let's take this section here. Like I would move this section in, and then have this image. Actually, it's probably easier to show up here because it's a smaller section. I would have this section move in, have a big image come in, and then the follow-up section would go back to its other width that it had. So I kind of gave you the whole wrapping idea. But you know, by and large, and you can also use, you didn't have to make it wrap. You could use a different size image down the side if you want it to, you know, to make that even. But by and large, you know, we have this notion that, you know, there is a 12-column grid, and the thing I want to address this morning is, and I'm going to undo this because I've wrecked poor Rebecca's, I've wrecked her wireframe, when really this is her wireframe. I don't want her to be able to do with it what she wants. But Rebecca, I would suggest a narrower measure there. If I could just get this back to where it was. Okay, so let's create a new file, because I think this is an important discussion about grids. When we are looking at, and I'll go ahead and get I'm going to go ahead and set this up with a desktop grid, or a desktop size, and then I'll also create a mobile. So we'll have a desktop frame and a mobile frame. And we'll come up here and we'll get like an iPhone X. All right, so we've got these two different sizes. The first thing that I would do in each of these cases is I'd probably put a frame, you know, like put a layout grid on here. Let's adjust that. There we go. I sometimes forget how to do this. Let's go ahead and make that 2. And then I'm going to have a gutter on each, or a margin on each side of 10. And what this does is it gives you the ability to do a little bit more in mobile. A lot of times what we find in mobile is that you may have an instance where, you know, you'll have a couple of small photos, or maybe these are like interface drawings, particularly if you're showing a mobile case study on a mobile device. Sometimes you can do like 2-column designs, but most of the time you're going to come back and you're going to have some sort of 1-column design. Okay, that's not all that uncommon, but that's pretty much the grid that you're going to have on a mobile device. You're not going to have anything that's super complicated. Pretty much this is 1 column all the way down. Sometimes you'll have things side by side, but it's not text. Like very rarely would you have text side by side. And if it is text, if you've spent any time watching the David Bowie CSS Grid video, you'll know that the text that goes side by side is something like that. It's like some sort of label for what's above it, and that's it. So So the and it would be larger than that. It'd be like this, and maybe their first line is bold because it's explaining something, and the second line is, something smaller. But regardless, it typically is a simple two-column display of small information, a one-column display otherwise, and that's mobile. Mobile is really straightforward. Mobile is really focused on content. But when we get over here into the larger size, the desktop or tablets even, your grid's going to look a little different. So when I create a layout grid over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that to rows or change it to columns. I'll still go ahead and use the 12. 12 is, I copied the 12 over from working with Foundation and Bootstrap, and it's something that I'm familiar with. This could just as easily be 3. It could. What really matters here, in my opinion, is the margin. Right now we're at a 1440 width, and 1440 is the width of the entire screen that I'm showing you right now. So if I pull up, say, let's go to, hey, there I am. Let's look at Calendly here. All right, Calendly. If we look at the width of this interface, this is like a dashboard. This is 978. And if you look at the width of the overall screen, it's 1440. So that means they have a gutter to the outside for Calendly. Calendly has a gutter of 230. All right. If I wanted to recreate this structure, what I would do is I would come back over. I would say, okay, margin's 230 to the outside. All right. And then to the inside for this, I would know that all of these little boxes, well, those are probably equal measure. I do want to see what the gutters are. Gutters are 26. So if I look over here and I look at my grid, my gutter's 20. So it's pretty close. It's pretty close. Which means that if I came in here and I drew, 3 equally sized rectangles, 1, 2, 3, I've pretty much got the Calendly dashboard design, because it's just replicate it down. Okay, but that's a dashboard. That's not like a case study. Like, what will we do? Like, I just want to pull this information over so we can see it closer. Instead of this, which is just kind of some individual like cards, what would we do if this was a longer passage of text? And the trick there is that it comes down to what is legible, what is best practice for type, not necessarily what is best practice for grid. A lot of times there's a few different designs you can go with. This 647 width is really, it's like a book. It's like a book. And if you use 18, 16, 22, anything in that range, if that's your type size, then you're going to end up with a type size that matches up with the Bringhurst rule. The Bringhurst rule of 66, which says 66 characters plus the empty spaces in any line is the maximum width that you should put into one of these columns. So that means that you need to have something to do. You have to have something here to the outside. Now there's a number of different ways to design for that. If I'm going to give myself a little bit of information to work with. So let's make something called label. And I'm going to go ahead and make this black, and we'll go ahead and make it 30. Okay. So I've got this label, and this label could ride along anywhere. A lot of times what I'll see somebody have it ride right there, and they'll push the information to the outside. Typically speaking, they do something like this, or they'll have section section name, and then you'll have that content go all the way down, and then you'll come back and you'll have another section name down below. All right, so that's one way to deal with it. Another way to deal with this awkward spacing is to do what I was showing you with Rebecca a while ago. So here we have section name, and section name is just going to be where it normally is across the top. And I'll go ahead and make that one line. So here's section name. And we'll allow that to ride to the outside, to the left. But then we will come back, and any sort of image, any sort of smaller image or quote or whatnot will exist out here. And then when you have a new section, you'll do roughly the same. All right. So that's a couple of ways to deal with the spacing. The third way that you often see is you'll see people say, hey, I'm not really comfortable with that, but I'll let the space be even to each side. Okay. And the big thing, I believe here, and actually this would have been like that instead. The big thing I believe that's important here is to understand that you still have a 12-column grid. You can do some different designs. You could even come in and in between these sections do different column configurations. These really all rely on the concept of a container. Like if you were going to draw, if I was going to create this in HTML, I would have a container, and I'm just going to draw this a bit larger, and let's put some stroke on this so we can see our different containers. So here's container. I'm going to remove the fill. So this is a container, all right? And inside of that container, I basically have a 2-column design. I'm going to have a div to this side. That's going to be for the section name. And then I'm going to have a div to this side. That's going to be for the content. And in this separation, that's what's going to give me the clean line down one side, but this side's going to stay consistent to the other. And this allows you to begin breaking those columns up. The real important thing is this container. I can do the big thing that I think is really important is that I've established the actual container size. Like I'm only going to go this wide with the design, and I will design within that. Once you've established the container size, you have the ability to change things up inside. The only time that I really get rid of the container when I'm designing for this is when I go super wide with an image, and that's when I break out of the grid altogether. I'll go full width with an image, and that image is like that. And then I'll come back with my container down below. So here I have my container again. Now, because the design is different down here, I'll have a different container. Like this container is for a completely different design. And I wouldn't advise switching the width up too much. I think it's interesting to break images out. I think it's interesting to break infographics out and whatnot. I don't necessarily think you need one section at this width, the next section at this width, the next section at this width. Pick a width, make your case studies easy to work with, and then you'll have a more consistent design as you move down. When I mention, I would start with a container and then you can do anything within it, that's fine. But have that container be a consistent width all the way through, rather than bouncing around for each thing. If we go back and look at Calendly, though, you'll notice that there's a couple of other things here that are interesting. Um, you'll notice that all the other elements align with that grid. So what's interesting here is that I can guarantee that there is a grid, there's a container that's applied to the nav bar, and that's the same container that's applied to this overview of event types and schedule types. That frame is also holding the set search bar. That frame is also holding the information about the account and the event type, the button to add a new event type, and then it's extended down. So this concept that you're going to use the same container all the way through, regardless if you're going edge to edge or if you're measuring in, it applies. So really the linchpin to this whole thing is the container. Figure out what your width is. Notice, like Calendly, there are some aspects that go edge to edge. So this nav bar goes edge to edge. That's fine. You can have a section. You can have a section do that. So we'll just draw a box really fast. So let's say this is the nav bar. Hey, I've got my nav bar. That's great. And inside of that nav bar, if I wanted it to line up with this element, I would have a section. Or I would have, a container. And that container is going to constrain how my elements align so that they line up when I go from one section to the next. So this nav bar is here, and the section is there, but they align. And that's the key. So the grid is still there. The grid is still important. You need to remember to account for the fact that your design will likely not go edge to edge. Like, typically speaking, there are designs that do that, but typically they are things that use what we refer to as mosaic. And mosaic brick layout is kind of like a Pinterest, where things just kind of fill up the space across the screen. That was really trendy back in, say, 2014. Mosaic designs were just all the rage. You don't see it a ton. It's just Pinterest at this point. And I'm not even sure if Pinterest uses it anymore. But that adjustment and the simplification of the grid to have a common container is pretty common. Common container is pretty common. But that container usage as you go through is a way to simplify the design, to make it easy for the user not to consistently have to look around for where things are. If you break the grid, if you break that column structure, make sure it's like for a background color like they were doing it on the nav bar, or it's for a big image that really needs to break out. All right? And if you can do that, if you can like minimize when you break it and you break it with a purpose, then I think you're more likely to have a good experience working with grids. But I don't necessarily use a 12 column grid. I don't need 1 column, 2 column, 3 columns. It's always a simpler 2 column or 4 column or 3 column design, and I typically use that in uneven, so like 1 column's wider than the other. Maybe 2 columns add up and they're being used in a similar fashion. There's a smaller 1 column label off to the side, or everything's just straight up and down. But that's really like the 3 usages that you see most often, aside from, like we saw with Calendly, the equal measure of elements across, and that's quite common as well. So that's just a quick overview of how to utilize the grid structure. The 2 big things: get your margin to the outside correct, much like over here in mobile, you want to make sure you have a margin to the outside so that the content isn't touching the edge of the mobile device, because that would be bad. And on the other side of it, you want to make sure that this margin is taking into account that on a desktop there will be empty space, and you can't quite determine how much empty space there'll be to the sides, because I'm on a 13-inch laptop. There could be a 15-inch laptop. There are even 17-inch laptops or 24-inch iPad, or not iPad, but iMacs and whatnot. They're larger and larger screens. You have to constrain that typography. You have to constrain that content to a column, or you have to design for interfaces that are larger. And what I would mean by that is you have to keep in mind that this wider measure, if I made this responsive going up, I could easily continue stretching this out, and that'd be a real problem, because then I get into that bad typography thing. So you want to constrain the typography to make sure that it remains a pleasant experience as the monitor sizes change. So I would allow my images to get bigger and smaller. I would keep my typography pretty constrained. All right, folks. I'm gonna check over here and make sure that we don't have any more additional questions. It looks like the queue is clear. Thank you so much for that, you folks over there this morning asking about grids. Actually, the funny thing is we do have a tutorial on Figma wireframing, as you can see right. Well, where did it go? Right here, where I'm actually working through a lot of that information, and I am simply not finished editing it yet. There's a lot of information in here, and as you can see, it's quite lengthy. So I do hope to have that finished soon. As you can see, you can see how I'm using the grid right there, and I'm using it in that common card approach that I just referenced a moment ago. So hopefully that will be out in the next couple of days. It is taking just a teeny bit longer than I want it to, but as you can see, there's quite a few edits in there. Anyway, it looks like we got another question here from Pedro. Oh, I had a question in regards to the horizontal grid. Yeah, fire away. We'll hang out here for a second. So there's a horizontal grid question forthcoming. I'm going to hang out here to make sure we get this. I'm going to give myself some more room to draw. Okay. Okay, so she actually included a wireframe here. We're going to go ahead and pull that in. Let's take a peek. And I want to read her comment before we look at that in full. Goodness. Okay. My issue is always trying to make sure the gap between each paragraph is the same. I think vertical grid is easier for me than horizontal, as it is for most people. Not all containers are the same size when it comes to horizontal content. Please look at the challenges section. Okay. Let's take a peek here. So, just getting it. So here's your overview. You've got your outcome, challenges. Okay. So, you're trying to. Okay. So, I believe what you're saying here is you're trying to get the spacing the same between these two areas. So And what makes this difficult is this circle that's jumping up. And I'm not trying to change the design here. I think the circle and the number is fine. But if you're trying to get well, that's vertical spacing. So I want to make sure I'm understanding the problem correctly, because I don't really see any like horizontal comparison between the two. Let's come back over here. Typically use a rectangle as a stencil, but I believe we can do that with grids. Not all containers are the same size when it comes to horizontal content. Like, I understand that this grid is longer. I mean, this unit is deeper. Oh, it's in view only. Can I get you to share that with me so I can actually like touch the elements? Because right now I can't move anything. Because I can undo and we'd be fine. So I'll wait for that share to come across. Seems to be reloading. She may have shared it with me, so it's... Yes, there it is. Okay. So, lots of grids here. I'm going to go ahead and... Let's see here. Okay, so you've got your rows, and... trying to figure out why so here's intro, here's option 1, option 2. Yeah, okay. We got it. Option 1, option 2. I don't want to delete the grid away, but I don't see a real option not to. Seems like you might have some... Okay, so there's one of the grids. Okay, so you just got a plethora of grids here. Okay. Oh, okay. That's elite. Oh. Weird. It was like they turned off for a second. Let's just let's turn those off for just a bit. Let's undo. Is that what? I don't want to lose your thing. Okay, there you go. All right, so I'm going to turn those two off for a second. So you're looking at your horizontal grid, and you've got it set up in rows. When I'm looking at this, if I was trying to set this up, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come off to the side. So let's give you back your thing. And what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just gonna grab these. And come over here in this untitled section. Let's get rid of all this junk. All right, so we got your case study over here now. All right. let's forget about this grid for a second. There's all sorts of stuff hidden in here. Okay, so we've got this. I need to get rid of the grid that I've got right now. All right, so I'm going to start. Let's go with rows. I said I wanted 100 rows, and I want the gutter between them to be 10. Problem is I don't necessarily know the height of those because they're set to auto. So the height, I'll say this is just a 10 by 10. I could also do 8 by 8 because that's a little easier to get the 16, 24, 32. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to try to grab these individual pieces. I'm going to always align to the top, and I'm going to try to figure out why this is. Okay, so there we go. I'm also going to look at, okay, so this is 16, so that helps. You've got a line height of 24, which is great because now we're on that grid of 8. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and align this. It's a little odd because it seems like there might be a little extra happening here because it doesn't quite align. But if I come in here, so our horizontal grid is each element has 8 with a spacing of 8, which means that I'm just trying to align on the 8s. Typically speaking, when I get really concerned with horizontal spacing, I'm worried more about this aspect of it. I'm worried more about baseline. So I'm going to ungroup these for a second. I'm worried more about making these things align this direction so that when I have a multi-column design over here, there's a common baseline that they're all aligned. You know, if I, for whatever reason, decided that, you know what, over here on this one, I want this one to have a spacing of 32, you know, this baseline would allow me to do that. They're not all going to line up though because they hit at different marks. To see this, we would actually need to move. I do not know why this is so difficult to move around. Ungroup. Man, everything's grouped. Oh, and then of course I deleted it. Ungroup. Okay. Oh God, sorry. Our file management just sometimes drives me nuts. Okay, I'm gonna come down here. All right. Why is that so troubled? All right. Let's go back to our rows. Let's go to, I need like 300 of these. All right, so now I can come in here And we can begin looking at this from a horizontal baseline perspective. So these are aligned together. And now, as you go down, what you should notice is that between the two, they are lining up, even though you've got a lot of space here. In this one, there are spots where this alignment comes together. So that's the first thing that I would be aware of, is that horizontal alignment isn't going to align consistently, but it should have some common spots where it does align if you're using the math the right way. So here we're using the 8s to align, and no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. We all work in different ways. I should be able to sort out how it's working. And again, I'm breaking this away from what you've been working on. So like, that's why I'm not trying to unlock yours. Yours is safe over here. I'm trying to work with this on a separate file, so you don't have to worry about me breaking something. I was talking with Shane last week about this though, and a lot of this comes down to spacing. Like this right now says that it's on. So here's 24. That's 24. If I said that this is 32 now, notice that it moves even the top. Like this is now on a different line height than the rest. I'd probably give this auto. And what happens when you say auto on that first line is you get rid of this weird space to the top. And that's one thing that I would do. I would just leave that at auto, and that allows your box and your type to really kind of work more together as a unit. Yeah. So from here, the question is, is the difference you're using a common measure? You can also use, instead of 36, if you wanted to use, well, I wouldn't. I would use 8s. Yeah, I would use 8s. Here, you've got 24. So that means your options are like 16, which is too tight, 24, which is just right, 32, which is probably too loose. But if this was a larger size, say 24, fact of the matter is now these two still align. If you look at this across, like everything about this is still in alignment, even though this is at a much different size. It's a much larger size. So that's kind of how I deal with horizontal alignment. I'm looking at it from a typographical standpoint. I'm not completely sure if that's what you were asking for, because I don't see any, like, this is a one column design with elements to, the only elements that you're really aligning with here are the numbers. And as far as that goes, my consistent thought on this sort of design is that if I'm going to, let's take this design and let's use it a couple of different ways. Okay, yeah, come on down. So here we've got it lined up. I would advise either aligning the shape up with the top of your text. So, like that. So you've got these elements together. I wouldn't necessarily worry about this. Like your shape is the shape. The other thing I would do is I would come through, and I would make sure that this body of work was like these two things were traveled together. Okay. Because right now they do. But make that make that a line, and then when you get down to the second one, you know, first of all, I would use, right, 8, 16, 24, 32. So there's 32 between these two elements right now, and this is now 2, and that's centered up. And then you come in with this second one, and yeah, I had this at 32, so I'm going to put this back at 32. I'm going to put that first one at auto. And I wouldn't worry about it. If I want it to be a little deeper away from it, I'd just make sure that I was aligning with the grid that I've created, and that's really how I would do that. Now, the other way that you could do it, obviously, is align it inside. So you could say, hey, you know what? I really want this to align with the top of the 1, and that's fine too. So there's the top of the 1, and then I would say, okay, so you're aligned with the top of the 2, and then I would adjust. I would still adjust on the grid. So this is going to start on a grid line. This is going to start on a grid line, and I would make sure that that is the same. And I really, that's not a bad thing to utilize. You said, hey, you were using like a rectangle for spacing. That's a pretty common trope, to be honest with you. The thing I like about Figma is that once I have established this is the spacing, you'll notice that it gives it to me right away. The difference here, though, is that you can't necessarily just use, like, this is 72 and 72. You can't necessarily just say it's going to be 72 between, because if this one was twice as long, then you have that issue. So then you get into this, you just have to kind of come up with a design that makes sense for you. So in this particular case, let's use a rectangle, and I'll say, okay, from the bottom, I'm going to go from the bottom of the line up, the last paragraph above, and that's going to be 40. All right, so it's 40 pixels because this is 5 times 8 is 40. Actually, it says it's 56. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so I can't clearly see. It's 56. So if I'm looking at this and I'm looking at that, I know that I need to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, I could just do this and then just say, okay, I'm going to group it, and then I'm at the Y position of 56. And now I know that 56 is the separator here. So that's kind of how I would, make sure the space between the 1 and 2 is the same as the 2 and 3. That's how I would do it. I would determine, okay, where does this end at? This ends here, and then there is, there's 56 pixels between the end of that and the top of this, and then now there's 56 pixels between the end of this and the top of this. And if you look at it, that is consistent. In this manner, you could also do it the other way, where you could also just as easily do it the other way, where you say, all right, this is going to line up with the circle, and I'm either going to be 56 away from this or 56 away from that. It just depends on what's the bottom. And here I could probably, Now I'm designing kind of cockeye here a little bit, but I do know the size, so I can always come back and say, all right, where's that 56 at? Oh, and actually, just use the math. If you know it's going to be 56, just go right here on the grid, and then say, I'm going to group it, and then I'm going to say my Y position is plus 56. And there you go. All right. Hope that helps out. But that's I would just use a simple horizontal grid, and know your spacing. Know your spacing, and you're either coming from the bottom of this or the bottom of that, and you've just got to determine which one of those that is. But we also got into horizontal spacing or horizontal baseline grid as well. So hope that was helpful. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and take a look at Melanie's work really fast. She submitted hers, and then we're going to wrap up. Melanie's got no problem. Melanie's got a design system, and this is the first I'm seeing of this. So, like my mind may be about the melt. Melanie, by the way, just got a new job. Congratulations. Trial Spark, I believe it is. Very happy for her. So Melanie here has, she's basically putting together a set of assets, a set of Legos, if you will, that she's going to use over and over and over and over again in her design. So let's go ahead and take a look at what she's chosen. So I'm getting a sense of her color palette. We have a sense of her headings. So she's got 54, 40, 30, 24, 20. So H1 through H5 is sorted out. She has a quote style, a caption style. And notice that she's created styles along the way, so she doesn't have to necessarily come back to this file and like pluck those things out. She's got those styles already created. Like she doesn't have to grab that and copy it over. She could just go click over on the styles area here. She also has her color palette well defined. My challenge there on the color palette is you may have you for your usage for keep it. If you know what your styles are, you know what your styles are. Shadows. So here's a card, and this is what she's doing for a button. These are good things to know how you want to utilize it. So here are the icons she's going to use. She has check marks and X's. I'm guessing this is for A/B testing. Here, okay, so up here she's going to use like a light shadow on her images. So this is what's going to happen when you hover over like a social media link, her primary link, a nav link, the hovers here for cards. So this is like she's thinking through what is her homepage going to look like. In this particular case, she's clearly going to be placing an image in where you see the checkerboard pattern, and then this is what a project title will look like as well. Okay, 16, and then this is the grid she's going to use. So here she's showing how an even setup would look. She would either have an even 2-column or 4-column design. If she has a 2-column design, it could be offset to the right. If she's got an offset to the right in both instances, and her layout's going to have a 1200 pixel width, which means she's going to have 120 as her outside margin on either of those. And I really think that's pretty strong, Melanie. The thing I am interested in is if you go full width, so you have assets. If you decide to go full width, would you still put the shadow on the asset? You may because you don't have a full width here. I'm guessing that you may not go full width for any of this. You don't really have a chance to have an error state Like there's no like, hey, you messed up your password, so you're not missing error state. Um, are these all the icons? Seems like you might have a well, I guess the chat bubble could be like contact me. Um, I do like the fact that you're not going with the social media, um, Twitter logo, Facebook logo, LinkedIn logo. Not that those are bad, but it's just they get like they become like little candy hearts. Like there's all these little images that appear on every page. I think your headings are smart. Would be interesting to see an example of like what's the quote usage really going to look like. I think this is where um, it's good to it's good to start with a system and kind of define these things. I I do encourage people that before you try to apply this to a full design, um, this is kind of a spot where I like for people to come through and go ahead and test the design, like test it with a sample block of copy with an image. Um, but I really do think that having these cards sorted out so that you can kind of see what the homepage is going to look like. I mean, you're already kind of designing a more specific module, and those modules reflect. You're using your button styles, you're using your H1s. Well, actually, that's probably like an H2. Um, let's see here. Is it 40? Yeah, it's 40. So it's an H2. So you're already building components out of your smaller Legos, which is good. Um, I would consider test this out. There's a couple of areas that we typically run into in the case study. So like think about like how does this apply to say a persona, or how does this apply um, to A/B testing or user testing? Like think about those modules where you use cards or you use some of these other elements, and go ahead and create a few of those assets to see, what does that how does that work? Does this collection of assets allow you to address a persona and an A/B test? And if it does, as you know, you got a big chunk of your case study ready to go. So I would do that. So for me, it's about testing the design system. You can't really test it until you have these basic Legos. But now that you have these basic Legos, I would try to build out a few components. That way, when it comes time to like build that case study, like you know exactly like, oh yeah, this is what I'm using for the personas, or this is what I'm using for competitive analysis. Okay, but this is really strong start. Okay, and I'm just taking a look. It looks like we're clear. So yeah, great new Chris Courtney feedback loop, and I will chat with all of you again tomorrow. Take care.